the Vice Presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party and Governor of Delta State, Dr. Ifeanyichukwu Okowa.
Thank you so much. The President of ICAN and delegates to this conference, I'm glad I'm in your midst today. But just to put on records that we only got this invitation on Monday, which is just 2 days ago, and I've had to come and represent the presidential candidate. But there are real issues in this country. I want to stay away from politics, but talk about the real issues. The Nigeria that we have today is a Nigeria that is troubled. There's disunity, and from different parts of this nation, we are speaking with voices of anger. So first is to find a pathway to reunite us as a people. Because if we do not work collectively as a people, and we pull in different directions, we will not be making progress. So our first major program is to ensure that we sit down with stakeholders in this country, and then we get to sit to talk about Nigeria and how best to stay together. But in staying together, there must be equity, fairness, both in terms of participation in government and in terms of development and provision of amenities across this nation. No section should be neglected at any point in time. When we work with social equity and ensure that everybody is included in governance and in the dividends of democracy, we will be able to have a better country for ourselves. Secondly is the issue of insecurity. A lot of us talk about it, but there are very many issues when you're talking about insecurity as of today. You're blaming the police, we blame the military. But what are the numbers? What numbers should we truly have? We must be very cautious before we throw blames. These persons that are working for us in the police force, even in the military, how trained are they? How regularly are we retraining them? How are we providing for their welfare? How are we providing equipment for them? We've talked about technology. Technology is very important. So we must be cautious. So we definitely, as a government, we have to increase the number of people who are in the Nigerian police force and in the military. We have to equip them and ensure that their welfare is taken care of and ensure that they are regularly trained. It's very important. But very importantly, this country cannot survive where we are at the moment without a state police force. And as a political party, my candidate wants you to know that the legislation has already been put in place to amend the Constitution and to have a law to govern the creation of state police right from the first week of its ascension of power. I have seen the legislation, I have read it, we have had a lot of people working on this in the past 1 year, and that legislation is ready. Because without the state police at the moment, it is difficult to secure Nigeria. Because what we're finding now is that states are beginning to have all manner of bodies created. They are Motekwa and the rest. That's not the pathway to go. States must have their police, and it's important. Talking about the economy, it's very bad. The economy of Nigeria is in a very bad state. And we must understand that as of today, as we talk, the budget of this nation in the last 4 or 5 years, every money spent on capital expenditure has been borrowed. And we have continued to borrow ourselves, and is the money being put in the right direction? There is a problem. Obviously, we do not think that it's put in the right direction, so we must begin to rework and reform the economy in such a way that it works. But the economy must be private sector led. Anybody expecting that the government itself is going to throw so much money into the economy and that is the pathway, it's not right. The economy must be private sector driven, but the government must provide the enabling environment to enable the private sector to work. And 50% of our GDP is by the MSMEs. And we must find ways for providing them finances and giving them the needed infrastructure and the pathway to work. As we talk as of today, Nigeria's oil only accounts for about 9% of GDP. And Nigeria's oil is what actually accounts for the inflow of foreign resource to this country. So we must find a mix and how to develop not just the oil sector, but we must ensure that the oil that we produce, we refine for ourselves. As long as we continue to import oil from outside and we do not quickly ensure that there is refining in this country and we continue to pay subsidy, we'll definitely not be going on the right path. So we must quickly encourage those and the private sector to ensure that oil refining is done within our country and that we begin to export. We must continue to ensure that there is gas development and that in the gas development we develop through down to the downstream sector, because there's a lot of money to get from there, and that is a pathway that the world is going in at the moment. So these are issues. So we must talk about the specifics and then provide the enabling environment. What is stopping our companies, our enterprises or industries from working? To get finance is not easy. At very high interest rate, we do not have power. But when we begin to ensure that the private sector has the needed environment that will enable them to work, the private sector will be able to develop our infrastructure, they'll be able to get people in, they'll be able to develop the power sector, because we must liberalize. We cannot ensure that government continues to be the Father Christmas leading everything when we do not have the resources to do so. So when we provide energy and ensure that the financial parts, where you also become important, that those paths are followed, we'll be able to develop the economy, because that is very important and key for us. We have decided that Nigeria has to be restructured. With the federal government too big, it's a military creation. We need to devolve more powers and more resources to the states and to the local governments, because that is the growth pole for development for our nation. These are things that we must look into. They've been worked out, the legislation has been put in place, and we're just waiting that as soon as we get in, we're going to take this to the National Assembly, have a discourse with them, have a discourse with Nigerians, and then find a pathway together. We must work together to be able to move forward. Education is in very bad state. The health sector is in very bad state, and we have strong points on that. Science education and technological education is very important. Entrepreneurial education is very important. We're ignoring it right from our secondary school level, even from the primary school, through to the universities. Entrepreneurial education must be emphasized. That is what we are doing in Delta State, and people know. And we must begin to find ways to create jobs and to make people learn that they can create jobs and work for themselves. They cannot continue to depend on government. These things are very important. Go to Delta State. We have grown a lot of entrepreneurs, and I can see hope going into the future. You start small, but the MSMEs is the pathway to go. We must develop them, we must fund them, we must ensure that we encourage people to go in that path. Coming into the health sector, the Health Act 2014, I led them in the National Assembly to ensure that we provided for the vulnerable. As long as you don't provide for the vulnerable, it is a big problem in this nation. The kind of health structures that we're having is creating problems for us. You must ensure that primary health care is the basic one, and that foundation must be strengthened. And that's why we decided that we must strengthen primary health care and that we must provide for health insurance. And particularly in so doing, you must be ready at the beginning to pay the premium for the less privileged, which would be those pregnant women who don't have their own private resource, and those children under 5 years of age. We are doing that in Delta State, and it is working for us. And I believe that we can do it for Nigeria, because it is something that is workable. These things and so many other things are there. Yes, the private sector must lead the economy. We cannot continue to rely on the consumption economy. It's not about importation. We can do it in this country, but we must create the enabling environment to get things to work. And we are talking about realities on ground and what is doable. And the PDP is ready to do that. And we have already a pathway. We have a covenant with Nigerians, a document. We are not just talking to issues. We are very convinced in ourselves that we need to do it together. And this country, there are so many issues that we have to look into. Even the issue of population management, we tend to ignore it, but it's a major issue in Nigeria. When your economic growth is far outstripped by your fertility rate, you cannot develop. In planning, we must be cautious where exactly we are going. It's important that we look at these issues. And these are issues that Atiku Abubakar and I and the rest of us have discussed. We are discussing with the private sector. We engage you, we engage all Nigerians. And together, we'll get things working again. God bless you.